¿Qué tal? Bueno, pues buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Well, could we make a start on our agenda for this session? First of all, with item 1, adoption of the agenda. But before that,
Sí, la aprobación del orden del día.
so approval of the agenda. In relation to what you've received, there are 2 changes concerning 9. The Fishing Opportunities Financial Commission with Mauritius, and 13. They've been put off until our next meeting. So we will not look at either 9 or 13. And then 15 and 16, we're going to change their order in the debate. We'll take 16 first and then 15. What this means? Well, you know I don't like to change the agenda, but it means that, well, because we have a very heavy afternoon this afternoon and tomorrow morning, having eliminated 2 items, we're going to have a lot more time. But we couldn't make any further changes, and therefore we'll just leave things like that. So, can we consider this agenda as amended, as adopted? Okay. 2, approval of minutes of the meetings of the 28th, 29th of November, 17th and 18th of December. As always, we will consider them to stand adopted if there are no objections during the course of the day. And that takes us to 3 communications from the chair. Well, I'd just like to inform you about one thing. Or we're going to make a farewell. Calero Coanto and the secretary, he's told us formally today that he's changing things. He's leaving fisheries. So, at this public meeting, I'd like to thank him for all of the work that he's done during all this time, especially from my point of view, since I've been chair, but of course during the course of the time he's been working for the committee. And I'd like to wish him the very best success in his new tasks, and I'm sure he will carry them out with the same efficiency that he's been doing for fisheries. So thank you very much. So all the very, very best to you. So that brings us to item 4 of our agenda. Which is the protocol between the EU and the Islamic Republic of Mauritania setting out fishing opportunities and the financial contribution provided for in the fisheries partnership agreement between these 2 parties that's currently in force. Now, as you know, we have had an exchange of views on this subject already. And after a meeting of coordinators, we raised the possibility of having a restricted group of experts. And I would like to thank them. I mean, they were informed only very recently, and we aren't paying any of their costs, but they were indicated by the political groups to tell us about their respective points of view concerning this matter. So there should have been 5 experts indicated to enlighten us today. Mr. Juan Carlos Faguero, at the last minute, has apologized for absence, so we're just going to have 4. Now, my idea here was to have 2 quite distinct blocks. First of all, the experts and their presentations, and then following on that, there'll be an exchange of views of the members of this committee with the experts. We can ask some questions to clarify things, and then once that debate with the experts and the committee, we will look at the point of view of the rapporteur, myself. for this agreement within the following debate among the members of the committee, not with the experts because that will be concluded, but just among members. So I'd like to say to the experts that you will have 10 or 12 minutes. Well, you can have 12 minutes now since there are only 4 of you. Well, 12 to 15, but please stick to that. And then I'll ask you for something more. That once each expert has spoken and explained their position, that you not repeat the position of the expert who spoke before. So everybody will present their own position. That's the best way for all of us to conclude. So I'd like to start first of all by giving the floor to Mr. Benoit Caillard, Director of Studies for Oceanic Development. You have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Well, thank you very much, Chair and MEPs. I'd like to present certain facts about this situation of the exploitation of stocks in Mauritania because I've studied the matter in depth after having made an assessment of the partnership agreement which concluded at the end of last year. So I'm going to present some facts, first of all, on the state of stocks of octopus. Now, I'm going to indicate certain things. In Mauritania, the formal evaluation of the octopus stock is carried out every 4 years in a working group under the International Scientific Group, the IMROP, and also within COPAS, the FAO organization, which can give scientific advice. And then the recent known assessments were carried out in 2009 by COPAS, and in 2010, when the Scientific Committee of the IMROP was held. So 2009 took on the data up to 2008, and then 2009 covered up to the end of 2009. So the fisheries were considered to have red indicators, given that the biomass of the octopus stock was 85% of the MSY, that is when it's in balance, and that the fishing effort was 155% of the MSY fishing effort. So the scientific institutes, the scientific advisors all agreed on the same recommendation that the effort on the octopus pulp ought to be reduced, octopus stock ought to be reduced, and that was in 2010. Since then, the evaluation of the 2010 group was, we know there was no recommendation, so it'll have to be redone. But the National Scientific Institute in Mauritania, the IMROP, has been following the stock of octopus through campaigns that they try to do on a monthly basis. Now, the graph that you can see here presents the results of the indices of abundance or stocks during these campaigns at sea. I mean, I don't know if you can see the scale, but you see the column on the right, which is July 2012, and we started in 2008. So what we can find in 2012 is that there are indices which are quite high, which would seem to indicate that there is a better state of the stocks. But this trend has to be confirmed, all the more so since the middle of July 2012, the physiognomy of fisheries has changed because Europeans could no longer fish for cephalopods. And what should we do now? Well, we've got old data which isn't formalized, so we have to reassess the state of the stock for octopus formally and the value of the maximum sustainable yield, because that was estimated at being about 30,000 tons, but when the type of exploitation of fishing changes, and it has changed because the European vessels have stopped fisheries, and at the same time we've seen a significant increase in catches by small-scale fisheries. So the type of fisheries, therefore, for the octopus stock has changed. So it's probable that the MSY value has changed. So it's necessary now to reassess the stock, to assess the position of fisheries in relation to what is considered to be balanced, to see whether there's surplus or not. So that's for octopus. Then something on small pelagic fisheries in Mauritania. Well, this fisheries is part of the fisheries consumed on the spot. The resource is abundant. Now, for several years, for some decades, there's been industrial fisheries even by trawlers of all types, European ones, Russian ones, Ukrainian ones. And for the last 2 years, interest in small pelagic fisheries has increased significantly, linked with the increase of world prices for fish meal. Now, the increase of the price creates an opportunity effect for ship owners, linked to a drop in resources in other areas of the world, especially in the Southeast Pacific. So that has attracted a lot of investors to set up fish meal factories, especially Polyond and the Chinese group that we've heard about in the press, and which are preparing significant investments in Mauritania. Now, for the moment, the meal is made with fresh fish usually, so the factories are fed with Senegalese small-scale vessels rather than by local vessels. Now, the situation of the sardine stocks we don't know about. COPAS, the FAO body, has carried out an assessment in 2010 and concluded that this stock was supposed to be overexploited, but that data does call into question how good this assessment was, because it's based on data that it's difficult to obtain from several fleets. So the diagnosis is that there is overfishing, but maybe it isn't a good statistic. So we have to reassess the state of the stock too. And we have to point out too that sardinelle, the sardines are part of the small pelagic fisheries of West Africa, and they're shared with Morocco, Senegal, and Gambia. And for the moment, there's no international agreement among these 4 West African countries to manage the stock, as the Law of the Sea Convention would request for these oil sardines. So the way of managing small pelagics isn't perhaps the best. Then this draft partnership agreement, which was negotiated a few months ago, which came into force the 1st of August. Well, the major facts are there are changes beside withdrawal capacity for several boats from the European fleet because of overfishing. We've noted that the fisheries areas have been moved out to sea as well, further from the coast. Now, the objective of moving fisheries away from the coast for oil sardines is to decrease the fisheries pressure on a resource which we think is overfished, and also to try to reduce and give priority to the local small-scale fleet, because that's part of the strategic framework for combating poverty by the Mauritanian government. That is to use small-scale local vessels, so they would have more space in the zone close to the coast. Now, the oil sardines resource is a variable resource within the European fleet, because there's an oil sardine resource which is along the coast, and then The one in mackerel is not. The horse mackerel is taken by the Estonian and Lithuanian vessels, where before they were more on the oil sardines. So the dependence is very. Now, concerning the shrimp fisheries, what motivated them to move the zone further out to sea was also a measure to protect small-scale fisheries, but it's also to endeavor to reduce the negative impacts on the environment, because coastal shrimp fisheries take place in waters that are about 20 meters deep, contrary to the high seas fisheries, which goes down to 60 meters. And we note for these fisheries environmental impact, which is unfavorable because of secondary catches, whether it's commercial species like octopus or others. And then to conclude, I'd like to give you some information about license costs. Now, this was also a major change from the last partnership agreement. That is that the price of licenses has been revised also, both in its calculation method and what it's based on, because this presents the ratio between the cost that the ship owners are going to pay for their access license and then the average price that you can hope in terms of your catches. So for the ship vessels, we think there's an average price on the market of 7,500 per ton, but the profits would be €620. That is 8% per ton. Now for the tunas, for tuna, it would be €1,500 a ton, and because of the license costs, the profit would be 2%. And then for the pelagic fisheries, and this is sold at a lower price than the other species, so it's €600 per ton, and then the ratio here is 20% because the license costs €123 per ton. So this shows that there are gaps which are significant among the different categories between what the ship owners pay for access and the price that they can hope to get from their catches. So that's the information I wanted to give you. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much for that presentation. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Gerard van Basra, the president of the Association of the Pelagic Fisheries Freezer Trawlers Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me for this press committee today with Mauritania on the agenda. I'm the president of this Pelagic Freezer Trawl Association, and we represent about 25 pelagic freezer trawlers active mostly in Europe and partly also in Western Africa. I give the insight of what we feel about the current fisheries partnership agreement with Mauritania, decided and signed for, initialed for by the Commission, on the pelagic component. First of all, our points of departure as a sector, that we in general have been and still are quite supportive of any EU-Mauritania fisheries agreement. Sometimes it is said that we may prefer a private agreement, but until now we always have supported a fisheries partnership agreement between the EU and Mauritania. Secondly, we have always and still have a basic attitude of cooperation with the EC and member states and with the governments where we fish, in all fishery policy matters, not only on the external dimension. Thirdly, we have been active in Mauritania since 1995, about 18 years ago. It started with on the basis of a private agreement. At that time, there was no pelagic component in the EU-Mauritania agreement. And shortly after that, the Commission invited us to incorporate our private agreement in the EU-Mauritania agreement, which we consented to. Since then, we fish under the EU agreement. In general, our strongest point of departure for the moment is you better have no agreement than a bad agreement. And we feel, and that's already a conclusion which I come to during my short introduction, that the current agreement for us is a bad agreement from a pelagic perspective. I give you quickly the comparison between the new and the old agreement. The old one stopped, let's say, at the 1st of August 2012, and the new one was just initialed and started mid-December. The catch opportunities are the same, 300,000 tons. There's no difference there. There's a slight increase, an increase of the Mauritanian crew. The first one now is 60% of the non-officers. It was 1/3 almost, something like that, of the overall crew, which means in practice that we have an increase, a small increase of the Mauritanian crew. New is that we have to give for free 2% of all our catches per trip. Until now, for the last 4 years, we have been, to be honest, asked or forced or harassed, whatever you want to say it, to give up to sometimes a number of tons free fish. That has been now institutionalized in this new agreement, so we have to give for free 2% of our catch per trip. Also, we have now a maximum 2% margin of tolerance between the logbook inserts and the landing. In the EU, the pelagic industry has 10% of margin of tolerance, so 2% is really very marginal as a margin, which means that it gives the opportunity to, I don't want to say it's cynical, but it gives really the problem for the ship owners that very often they have a little bit more difference between the assessed weight of the cargo and the landed weight of the cargo, which automatically will cause a lot of infringements and big fines. So this is a too low margin for us. We have now a double satellite system on board, obligatory. It was a single one, the EU. We have now EU and Mauritanian. We have the obligation to transship at buoy number 10 in the port of Nouadhibou. Before that, there was no obligation. There's still a small exception for those vessels who cannot transship, who are technically not able to transship. We come to the bigger differences, and this is the ship owner's fee. As just was indicated by Monsieur Caillard, we paid in the old agreement about, for our average vessel, 50,000 euro a month for a fee. This has gone up quite strongly, and it amounts to 6 times as much, 300,000 euro for an average PFA vessel, which is, I would say, a very steep increase. And you could see it if you compare this to the other categories under the new and old agreement. We pay much more than, the increase is much more than for the other categories. And the last one is the fishing limit. There's a lot said about the fishing limit. It has become a limit that we have to stay outside the 20 nautical miles. That was under the old agreement 12 to 13 miles, depending where you were in Mauritania. That has been always the case, 12, 13, since 1995. So that was a sudden increase from, let's say, 13 to 20 miles overnight. I want to go into a little bit to this fishing limit change. It was proposed by the Mauritanian negotiators during the round in December 2011. The reasons why was a bit unclear. You could say to protect the Sardinella, but it was not a really clear scientific reason for that. The EC and many member states, not all, decided to accept this against all strong signals from us, the industry, that this was a non-starter. In fact, we have been from the start that this is not only a non-starter, it is really a deal breaker. We have been very clear to the Commission and to member states that this would really mean unprofitable fisheries and automatically would lead to a low even zero use of the plastic component. And during the final negotiations, the European Commission may be alerted by our constant letters and statements that it was an impossible technical condition. The European Commission asked member states to come up with some figures about the catch positions of the plastic vessels during 2011. That has been given by member states, of course, to the Commission prior to the last round, which was late July 2011. And I give you the first catch positions of our vessels. We have vessels in Germany, the UK, and the Netherlands, flagged, active in Mauritania. The first column is, of course, the name of the vessel. The second column is the percent of the 2011 catches made inside the 20 miles limit, so between 13 and 20 miles. And the third column are the percentual catches in 2011 outside the 20 nautical miles. On the average, our fleet, the PFA fleet, and I give you the names, you see the names of the vessels below. On average, in 2011, our PFA fleet caught 56% of our catch volume inside the 20 miles and 44% outside the 20 miles. If you look at the vessels individually, you see it differs from vessel to vessel. Most of the vessels have not been active during the entire year. Some did. Some vessels went for the sardine season, which is able to do it also outside the 20 miles. So there's big differences from vessel to vessel, but still you see overall a strong dependency of the fisheries inside the 20 nautical miles. If you look at the Polish two-vessel, the Polish fleet, I don't have figures with me of the Lithuanian and Latvian vessels, but the Polish fleet gave me their figures, which all the Commission have them, of course, as well. And there you see that the two Polish vessels were, on the average, even more dependent on fishing inside the 20 miles. Normally, the Polish fleet is targeting more horse mackerel and less sardinella. We're targeting mostly more sardinella and less horse mackerel. But even with horse mackerel, the dependence of the inside zone, let's say the inside of 20 miles, is even bigger than ours. And if you look at this, you can see that you come only to a few conclusions which I come to now, and then I end my story. First of all, the combination of technical conditions, and I gave you a number of technical conditions, but most importantly, the very steep increase of the license fee has led to underutilization of the plastic catch opportunities agreed in the protocol, together, of course, with the 20 miles limit, which really leads to less catches. There's, for us, no value for money in this agreement. Secondly, the extension of the fishing limit to 20 nautical miles really is the deal breaker. We have written letters to the Commission about this all the time. On every level in the Commission and every time before and during a round. Without this 20 miles limit, we could consider to try it, even with the stronger technical conditions, with the higher fee. But with the 20 nautical miles, it would be a kind of a suicidal case. You don't go out to Mauritania and you're sure you don't make money, you will only lose it. Running freezer trawlers is a very costly business and risky, and you don't want to add more risk to that according to this 20 miles condition. We feel, and that really has to be said, there in the protocol with Mauritania, there is a priority for EU fleets. That means that all the conditions which have been put to the EU fleet, Mauritania has to implement also with their agreements with non-EU international fleets. But the result of this is that both the EU fleet and the international fleet have left the area since August. So this advantage, this priority thing, this privilege, is only existing on paper. It's not a real practical advantage until now. We feel that if we as EU pelagic fleet are absent and continue to be absent in Mauritania, it's not a real help for developing an effective fisheries management in Mauritania, at least for the pelagic stocks. And we need that. We need that from the start. We have all the time been investing money and effort in getting the science better, and we know that if the EU fleet will not be there anymore, it will set aside a little bit a quick development of effective fisheries management in Mauritania. Also, because everything we produce in Mauritania is exported to countries of the sub-Sahara Western Africa, like from Côte d'Ivoire to Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, etc. These are now, there's a big gap, in fact, in this, in the supply for these markets, and you see that that these markets are starting suffering there because there's a whole lot of pelagic fish used to be produced in Mauritania is not anymore produced for the moment and is not reaching the markets in Central West Africa. So we feel that our position is basically, as it always was, we as an industry, we continue to support a fisheries partnership agreement with Mauritania, but it has to make also sense economically, also has to be sustainable, etc. And it has to take account of the local fishermen, sure, but it also has to make sense economically for the EU fleet. And until now, it doesn't. So, in our view, the current protocol has to be amended. And we hope that you, as European Parliament, can do your best and help the Commission and the Council to come to the conclusion that they have to amend the Commission this protocol. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Sid Ahmed Abeid, Chairman of the Small Fisheries Section of the Mauritanian National Fishery Federation. Thank you very much. Honourable members, Rapporteur, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for having given an opportunity to a Mauritanian small-scale fisherman to take this floor before this committee. I'm Mr. Sid Ahmed Abeid, and I'm chairman of the small-scale fisheries section of the Mauritanian National Federation of Fisheries. As you know, Mauritania is a developing country, and for 35 years we only had small-scale fisheries in very restricted areas. But the activity that has been developing and which has contributed to ensure that small-scale fishing has become an engine for economic and social development in our country is, in fact, the octopus fishery. I can say this because I'm the first fisherman who in 1978 started fishing octopus. At the time, I remember there were only 17 small-scale boats involved. We were fishing for fish. We were fishing a local species called tuyo, but we only sold it for 2 cents a kilo in 1978. And Japanese development agency got in touch with me and told me that we could fish octopus, and that we'd be able to sell them this high-quality octopus at a very good price. So I got involved in octopus fishing. I tried all sorts of material to make my pots. I used tin cans, PVC. I used different materials to make my pots, but nothing was ideal. The pots would break, they'd be too heavy or too light. And once I went to Las Palmas and I saw that the Spanish was filling water in 5-litre bottles, and that a big bottle was just the right size for the sort of pot I was looking for. So I went to the bottle manufacturer and I asked him to adapt these large bottles, and I then sent these to Mauritania, and that turned out very well. And as this was happening just after a drought, in In 1973, there was a serious drought, and a lot of Mauritanians then came to the coast and started trying to work in the octopus fishery. And this also coincided with the creation of the Mauritanian Fish Processing Company, which also helps us to process our octopus. And now there are 36,000 small-scale fishermen, and we use 7,500 small-scale boats for our octopus fisheries, and we ensure 60% of the national requirements and 70% of the national value added from this area. And we are creating a lot of employment as well. We have people working in 50 different factories which freeze the octopus, and there are 12 plants creating dugout canoes. There are there are thousands of transporters and truckers helping us to move our octopus, and so the added value is much higher than it would be with an industrial fishery. So what I'm telling you is what we would call the development. What I'm describing is what we would call development, but we also want to ensure that we have sustainable fisheries. And I'd like to remind you, first of all, that this pot fishing method is a selective approach. If the octopus is too small, we can then release it alive, and that's very important for us. We don't want to fish octopus that are too small. That's not economically viable. Moreover, certain measures have been taken in recent years. We are trying to promote sustainability. We have 4 months when we don't fish, and a minimum of 500 grams of eviscerated fish, gutted fish. That's the absolute minimum. And we're also controlling and managing catches. I'd also like to underscore that European states support these efforts to promote sustainability. With help from French development agencies. They have helped us improve our factories. They've helped us organise training. And then there's German development agencies, which for years has been helping us to promote our efforts in the area of management and surveillance. And over recent years, we've also wanted to diversify our activities, and we want to promote sardinelle small-scale fishery, because the Mauritanian people are now turning towards the sardinelle. They want to eat it on a daily basis. It's becoming a staple. And we also want to fish close to the coasts in very shallow waters, just 20 metres at even. So we want to develop a fleet of more solid small-scale vessels which will allow fishermen to fish further out into deeper waters under safe conditions. As sardinelle and oil sardines are shared with our neighbours in Western Africa, and given that this resource is very important as a staple for feeding our populations, we are having discussions with the Senegalese small-scale fisheries, with the Gambians as well, to see how we can promote within our countries the setting in place of joint management. And we want to give priority to small-scale fisheries and their ability to provide and for the markets, for local markets. Now, if I'm explaining all these projects that we have to ensure sustainable development in our sector, it's so that you, as members of the European Parliament, can understand what's at stake when it comes to our fisheries partnership agreement with Europe, because Europe will remain our first partner when it comes to the fisheries sector. But we want this to be a fair partnership. We've been fighting for that since 1996, first at the national level and then at the international level. And that means that I've been able to come to speak to you directly today. And we want to say the following. We do have the material and human means in order to exploit our octopus stocks in a sustainable way, and to exploit our other resources, other species in a sustainable way. And let us fish our octopus as well. let us have access to our own stocks. And this is the message we put to the government when the government organised and concluded an agreement in 2011 with the the Chinese company Polindun, which was detrimental to our interest. We've been mobilising civil society, the media. We've been organising workshops. We've been organising protests about this agreement concluded with Polindun, and we've challenged our civil servants on the television in order to say the same to them. We want to be able to fish our own stocks. Certain stocks should be reserved for us. This is a non-negotiable as far as we're concerned, because this is our daily bread. This provides jobs and incomes for our people. When it comes to the agreement with the Chinese, well, we had a piece of good news last week. The government has announced that the activities of the Chinese company Polindun should just be limited in the future to these small pelagic fisheries. And the government announced at a press conference that the conditions offered to the Chinese and to other foreign fleets would be the same offer made to European fleets. And the government also made it clear that the octopus stock will be reserved for the Mauritanians, and in particular to the Mauritanian small-scale fishery. These technical conditions offered to European fleets, we think these conditions go in the right direction. First of all, they allow us to exploit ourselves, our own octopus. That's the main and most important feature of the protocol. The new fisheries zones are progress as well, represent progress as well. We can fish further out, and that will help us to protect the seabed, or avoid accidents, and collisions with the dugout canoes, and avoid excessive bycatches. To give you an example, you must realise here in the European Parliament that half of our bream stock is actually caught as a bycatch of large trawlers, and we're asked to ensure sustainable management of this resource. But how can we under those circumstances? In order to, when it comes to financial compensation for us, well, the most important thing for us is not to have 1 million, 10 million or 100 million euros. The important is that whatever money there is by way of a financial contribution should be well used and transparently used to promote development. Transparency in the fisheries sector, whether it be when it comes to using money to finance the sector, or when it comes to the licenses and the conditions attached to the licenses, well, that's essential for us, an essential condition. In this framework, we supported the integration of the fishery sector in the transparency initiative for the extractive industries. It's the first time that a country tries to ensure that its fishery sector comes under this transparency initiative for the extractive industries. And this, our Maritime Fisheries Ministry is now working on this. And when it comes to the financial contribution linked to these agreements, well, we, the small-scale fishermen, regret a great deal that we haven't seen yet anything from the European Union when it comes to investment in infrastructure, or when it comes to technology transfer, when it comes to improving our ports, improving our processing plants, or our storage plants, or we regret that we haven't seen very much of that yet. So when it comes to investment, well, I think it's very important to have investment if we want to develop a real win-win partnership. And this is what we hope, and we hope to be able to do in the context of this new protocol, and we hope that we'll get your support. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. And finally, if you want a copy of my speech, you'll find some copies by the door. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you, says the chairman. And now I'll give the floor to our last rapporteur, Mr. Javier Garat, who is the chairman of Europesh.
Adelante.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much. As the president of Europesh, I would like to say that I agree with Mr. Basford. I'm not going to talk about pelagic fisheries. I'm going to talk about the other possibilities. The first comment I'd like to make is that the negotiation by the Commission during the entire length of these negotiations, well, I think that the negotiation was conducted very badly. We can say that on behalf of the European fisheries, because we didn't get a result that was satisfactory for most fishermen, despite the fact that just before, the day before the initialing of the agreement, the entire fisheries, the fishery sectors of the Mauritania and the member states said, as Mr. Gerard von Balsvoort said, it's better not to sign this agreement, better not to have agreement at all rather than a bad agreement. The Commissioner was consulted, the Commissioner didn't listen, and she said it was her responsibility to sign the agreement, and now we've ended up in this situation. So the first question we have to ask is this a good agreement or a bad agreement? And for me, the answer is very clear, especially after 6 months of implementation, or even if it's provisional implementation of the agreement. We've seen a clear weakening of all the fisheries categories, and I'll give you more details in a moment, apart from the tuna fishery sector, where the technical conditions haven't been changed, and apart from a couple of demersal trawling vessels. But apart from that, the shellfish industry, the pelagic fleet, well, we're not using the agreement. And what has this meant? Well, it's meant a loss of thousands of jobs in the European Union and in Mauritania. In Spain, for example, if we think about cephalopods, well, 35 vessels have stayed in port, and the crews still have to be paid, and many of them are here today listening. And in Spain, moreover, in the Canaries, 1,200 workers have been made redundant, and you can imagine what effect this had. And 20 companies have been shut, and about 100,000 will be lost in turnover for the activities that was generated by the agreement in the past in the Canaries. And in Spain, we've seen that hundreds of crew members, hundreds of people working on the land are now redundant and or unemployed and have no activity. So it's a bad agreement. It's a bad agreement because the technical conditions and the economic conditions for most of the fisheries sectors are unviable, despite the fact that even then, when we were finalising the last agreement, the companies were already at the very limit, of the very verge of non-viability, and they had made it clear what the implications this agreement would have for all of the sectors. If you look at the shellfish industry, the cost of licences has gone up fivefold, and most will be paying at least twice as much for their license. And so for an average-sized vessel, instead of paying €57,000 a year, they'll be paying €127,000 per year, which is just much too much. And when it comes to the fishing zones, well, these have been changed. In the south, we've lost. We've moved from 6 to 8 miles, and that affects 50% of the fleet and their landings. But above all, we've lost a very important zone in the north, and in agreement with the Institute, the data from the Spanish Oceanographic Institute, the data shows that there's going to be a loss of 21.6% in prawn catches, and it means at the end of the year they have €120,000 less by ways of income. And for the first time, we've got a TAC of 5,000 tonnes for a stock that was fished sustainably in the past and over time, and there was no danger for this stock, and there's no scientific recommendation to fix a TAC, and we feel that at the moment this is a serious mistake. And when it comes to the bycatches, 15% of this has been eliminated for 15% of cephalopods. And there's 180,000 loss per vessel per year, and then there's the 20 to 10% abolition of bycatches for pelagic fishes, and so that's going to mean €1,500 impact per vessel, and it is only going to promote discards, because if bycatches are not allowed, then the fish will be discarded. And then when it comes to the fresh fisheries and for black hake, what we see that there's going to be an increase, a considerable increase in the fee, between 200 to 400% increase in the fee. And there's a TAC has been fixed at 4,000 tonnes with no scientific basis. And this means that only 11 vessels will be able to fish. At the moment, there are just 2, and perhaps only 2 left in less than a year. And the fisheries exclusion zone has been moved to 6 miles as well. And when it comes to the tuna fishing and the long line fishing, there the technical conditions haven't changed for long line fisheries, so they will carry on using the agreement. When it comes to the cephalopods category, Parliament in 2011 in a May resolution said that there was overfishing here, but we can say today that the scientific information that we have at the moment is that that is wrong. That's an incorrect piece of data on cephalopods. And we have done some work with the Spanish Oceanographic Institute on our vessels, and we've collected, we've taken 3,000 we've collated 3,000 pieces of data, and we've done some sampling, and the status of the stock is very good. And this is also backed up by the Scientific, Technical and Economic Committee for Fisheries. But unfortunately, the Commission didn't use the report, but used the earlier reports from 2009, and this only covers one year in the life cycle of the cephalopod. So this scientific information that was used by the Commission wasn't appropriate. And then in July 2012, the fleet had income which was higher, but to the extent of 300%. This in line with what COPAS has been saying, and in line with what the Mauritanian Fisheries Institute has been saying. So so there's a reduced fleet, and there's going to be reduced fisheries effort. There'll be, instead of 55 vessels, there'll now be 32 vessels. So there was 55 vessels in 2011. That's reduced to 32 vessels in 2012, and that reduced the fisheries effort and helped the stock to recover. So there was a reduction in the fisheries effort. And now the next question we ought to ask is this agreement a profitable one? I'd like to know whether the Commission thinks it's value for money. In our view, given the present conditions, it's a very expensive. It's a very expensive agreement, 70 million euros for less fishing, and the fishery contribution hasn't been reduced, despite the fact in past protocols, because the cephalopods and octopus were included in the agreement, the financial contribution went up. But now we see a reduction by 29% of fishing opportunities for European vessels. And when it comes to black hake, now the fees have gone up by 200%, between 250% and 400%. So this is not a profitable agreement at the moment. The Parliament likes to say that the taxpayers' money has to be used effectively, and this is a rule we should be following here as well. So is this agreement more sustainable than the earlier one? Well, economic and socially speaking, no, quite clearly not. And when it comes to the environmental point of view, and do the new zones protect the ecosystems? Well, we think that the best scientific information wasn't used when it comes to cephalopods. Now there's going to be attackers there, and for black hake, and there's going to be a limitation of fishery effort. But I don't think that objective scientific data was used to establish this. And when it comes to the hake, then the available scientific information makes it clear that there was sustainable fishing. We're talking here about seabed, sand seabed, and this fisheries were fishing in a sustainable way. And when it comes to the zones where our boats are fishing, this doesn't come. Our fleets don't come into conflict, don't clash with the local boats, so there isn't competition there. And more seriously, if we're going to lose very valuable scientific information in the European fleet, when it comes to the shellfish fishery, there was always a scientist on board of the shellfish boats permanently throughout the fishing campaigns. this provided us with a lot of valuable information. And now other third country fleets will be replacing our European fleets, and they will respect the environment much less. I'm talking about the Chinese. And when it comes to the fact that you have to land the fish in Mauritania, that's compulsory. Well, I think there should be a voluntary approach to this, and with incentives provided to those who can land in Mauritania. Why? Well, because don't forget you've got the Canary Islands, so that's an outermost region. It's one of a very important EU and Spanish outermost region, and because of the landings in Mauritania, this is going to mean the loss of jobs, 1,200 jobs to 3,000 jobs, and so you shouldn't forget the legal basis for helping the outermost regions that the chairman's very well aware of. We need coherence with what the EU adopts by way of legislation and its agreements with third countries. There should be coherence there. We shouldn't be damaging the outermost regions. We shouldn't be damaging the economic conditions for the Canary Islands. And to wind up the new a new calculation basis, is it better? We don't think it is, because if you look at the tax, well, I think the tax is going to give rise to corruption and fraud, because there'll be problems with weighing catches in the areas where inspections are carried out. This has happened in the past. I'm sure it will happen in the future. So this protocol and the present conditions underpinning this protocol makes that it's an agreement that is unprofitable for most fisheries categories. It's a very expensive agreement, although Mauritania is being paid 70 million, and some of these fishing opportunities are not going to be usable by Mauritania. So we feel that it's necessary urgently to have a meeting of the Joint Scientific Committee to look again at octopus and the other species, and we need to have a meeting of this Joint Scientific Committee. We need to resolve the problems that we've raised here for the pelagic fisheries and for the other fisheries. Otherwise, the Commission should use Article 5 of the protocol and actually give up and abandon this, revoke this protocol, because it's not usable. In fact, the European Parliament should not should not give its consent to this fisheries protocol. Thank you.
Thank
you. Well, that concludes our 4 expert contributions. We can now hear from members who may have questions for our experts. First of all, then.
Thank you very much, Chair, and apologize for coming in late. My flight was delayed, unfortunately, so that was why. And I also apologize to the speakers that I didn't hear in the beginning. That was really not my intention. But I have a few questions. One question is to Mr. Garat that I just heard. He was talking about the Spanish Oceanographic Institute and its recent findings, and there's been a lot of references to this report. As far as I know, the report, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the same report that was presented in the El Dirac meeting in Brussels, and the title of the presentation was "In a Hurry Attempt of Assessing the Current State of the Cape Black Octopus Stock." Is that the same one? There's 2 of them. Anyway, the author of this report was very, very cautious in saying that this wasn't a full assessment, and it rather contained indications that the stock could recover to more abundant levels if some recommendations were implemented and environmental conditions were favorable. And also, I would like to hear a little bit more about this study, but above all, if Mr. Garat recognizes that it's up to the third country to estimate its surplus. And if Mauritania has a strategy to develop its own fisheries, as we heard from Mr. Sid Hamed, president of the small-scale fishermen in Mauritania, who represents 36,000 small-scale fishermen. I think maybe it should be up to the independent state of Mauritania to make that decision. And then the first speaker, which I didn't hear, was, I believe, Mr. Benoit, who did the evaluation report. And I'd like to ask him a little bit more about the environmental impact of these fleets, of the European fleet, and if it would justify taking them further off the coast, particularly in terms of impact of the seafloor and bycatches. And lastly, I'd like to ask the Commission how many boats are actually utilizing this protocol at the moment. Is it very much underutilized? How many boats are actually using the protocol at this moment? Thank you.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you. I'll let all the members speak first and put their questions, and then the speakers can respond. Mrs. Fraga, please. Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank all our speakers this afternoon for enabling a very stimulating debate. One thing is clear is that the negotiations have not gone as well as possible. This Parliament has been criticising the previous agreement and the agreement being negotiated because of the use of vessels, or the degree of use of vessels being enabled by both agreements, especially with respect to shellfish and pelagic fish. This agreement with Mauritania is going to be very expensive. A great number of species have been eliminated. If you look at pelagic trawlers and shell fishermen, for them the technical conditions are not practical because they're frankly just all in all not acceptable. And here I would like the Commission to justify why we are paying for such quantities to be fished in an agreement which is impractical, which cannot really be properly used and exploited. If you look at the case of Blackheath, you have 2 vessels for Blackheath, 4 demersal trawlers, and the pelagic vessels, or fishing vessels, are only able to work in Mauritanian waters under very poor conditions. So the viability of the whole operation for community fishermen in these waters is more or less, well, zero, which means they'll just go and fish in other areas, which will mean you'll just have 2 longliners fishing in the area for tuna, and that's about it. So the impact of this agreement is minimal, and I'm just wondering why the Commission has negotiated this agreement, having already now paid 70 million euros for the privilege of having this agreement. Now, other questions. The first speaker, Mr. Kayar, was very clear. He said that the data used for the negotiations from 2009 and 2010, whereas the Oceanographic Institute data has data in 2011. And the study done by the Oceanographic Institute is one that Mr. Kayar and other people could have used, and those figures give us a rather different picture. And the European Commission never used the Oceanographic Institute's research and data, and which would have told us that the cephalopods stocks are very low. And quite simply, the data which was available from the Oceanographic Institute just haven't been used by the parties, in particular by the Commission. And the thing is, if the Mauritanian fishermen don't have a surplus of stock, we can't go fishing there. I'd also like to ask the Commission whether in the case of small-scale fishing, artisanal fishing, is Mauritania fishing in octopus zones? If so, there could be problems there as well. As regards shellfish, I'd like to know why we have a number of zones which have been agreed upon for what is a sustainable set of species, which will not have any effect on the ecosystem, but which, on the other hand, given that fishing won't be allowed in these zones, will cause enormous damage to the fisheries sector. And this agreement, don't forget, given all the restrictions being imposed on the fishermen, will lead to a 33% loss in their, or reduction in their revenue. So there's no point in our fishermen going there in order to lose money. Then another question to the representative from Mauritania. My question to him is this. Small-scale Mauritanian fishing, basically the fishermen involved are not from Mauritania, as far as I know, they're from Senegal. Could he perhaps confirm that situation? I mean, he talked about 36,000 fishermen, but I think the majority of them in Mauritanian waters are from Senegal, not from Mauritania. And this means that if you look at the industry in Mauritania, especially around the port of Dagibou, thousands of people will be affected in the hinterland industries if landings are not taking place in that port, because and the same applies if our fishermen, European fishermen, are not making landings in this port either. Once again, I think the European Union has negotiated technical conditions here which have nothing to do with the potential fishing possibilities and fishing opportunities in the sea. And going back to Blackheath, for Blackheath, fishing facilities in theory were negotiated for 11 vessels with a fishing limit of 4,000 tonnes. That's quite a lot for 11 vessels, by the way. So I'd like to know why the European Union negotiated this sort of thing, because it's impossible for 11 vessels to fish 4,000 tonnes of Blackheath. So what's the point of negotiating such a situation? I don't get it. So there are a lot of conditions in the agreement which I can say, don't hold water, so to speak. So why the heck are we signing up for such an agreement? Thank you. We've had a number of questions from two speakers. Some of the questions were for the Commission, some were for our experts. Well, at this stage in the proceedings, we have to put questions to the speakers, and the Commission we can talk to perhaps on another occasion or later on. Perhaps we can put questions to the Commission later. So could we just limit ourselves to questions to our four guests, please, at this stage? Mr. Arsenis.
Thank you very much, President. I believe that this is a reasonable agreement, and it's a reasonable agreement for one reason, if nothing else. It follows what we have asked in our resolution about how we should do the fish stock partnership agreements. It is exactly the first time that it applies what changes we asked to be implemented in the new fishing partnership agreements. And it's for the first time that it implements the principle that we should fish the surplus. And of course we need to fish the surplus. Mrs. Fraga mentioned about stocks that cannot actually be exploited anymore. It's because that they were fished excessively. And it's because it's exactly by fishing only the surplus that we'll restore them and we'll be able to provide opportunities for fishermen from those countries, from our countries, from all over the planet. So we are following the correct path. It is logical that at the first stage we have to pay for damage that has been done. It will be the fisheries, the fish catches are going to be, the catches are going to be lower. This is because we opt for sustainability in order to have more catches for more time in the future.
Gracias, señor Arseni. Señora.
Thank you. Mrs. Bilbao. Thank you. A number of questions I wanted to put have been put, but I would like a clear response with respect to the octopus stocks. According to the various reports, the octopus stocks are in good shape, and apparently the European Commission hasn't made use of this information. So I'd like to hear from the speakers whether the Commission has given them an explanation as to why it hasn't taken into account the state of the octopus stocks, because it hasn't told us why it hasn't taken this information into account. Did it tell them? So it seems to me that the resources are available here, both for Mauritania and for European fishermen. So I'd like to ask our colleague from the small-scale fisheries in Mauritania whether they have evaluated the harm that could be done to the local population because of the lack of licenses being issued to European vessels. What impact will this have on the local population along the coastline and the hinterland in Mauritania, and so on and so forth? And finally, we all, of course, want an agreement. The tuna vessels used made good use of their license last year, and I understand that this year fewer licenses are being issued to them, but perhaps an effort could be made to respond to the needs and requests being put forward by the sector, the tuna sector. I know the tuna sector in Europe is against this agreement being negotiated because for them the figures are not big enough for them. They feel they could catch more fish in these waters. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Romeva.
Gracias. De hecho, es añadir una sola.
Thank you. I'd just like to add one question to Isabel Lovins, and this is a question for Mr. Sinan Abed. Could I ask you, how many jobs, could you tell us how many jobs could be created if octopus management were the direct responsibility of the Mauritanian fishing sector? Thank you very much. Who's next?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I apologise for being late. Snow in Britain seems to take its toll on the transport system. So I didn't hear everything that the gentleman from Mauritania had to say. Looking at these bullet points, and speaking very much from a British point of view, which is what I will always do here, this seems to be a sort of dressed-up foreign aid that the British taxpayer is contributing 70 million euros to hand to Mauritania, and it seems to allow more Senegalese fishermen to fish there. That's perhaps looking at it rather cynically. Can you assure me that the British element of this 70 million is actually going to really help people in Mauritania? Thank you.
Gracias, señor Sánchez Presedo.
Thank you, Mr. Presedo. Yes. Thank you, Chairman. I have some comments in substance I'd like to make a little later on, but first of all, one or two questions. I'm looking at a newspaper dated 31st of December. The main fisheries journal in Spain, and the headline is Adios Mauritania. Now, I'd like to ask Mr. Gaillard what the social impact of this agreement will be, and secondly, the data used for a negotiated agreement are from the years 2008 and 2009. I'm wondering whether more recent data couldn't have been used in order to have an up-to-date picture of what we've been negotiating. I think the Mauritanian small-scale fisheries representative made a number of interesting comments, and I'd like to ask whether he agrees with the conclusions of the scientific committees. Would he agree that the cephalopods stocks are in the state as described in those reports? And I'm wondering what he thinks about the obligations in the new agreement with respect to what proportions of landing should be made by various vessels. And Mr. Kara, if this protocol is signed, will it still be possible to make any changes or adjustments in order to make the report or the protocol more practicable, or will it be necessary to start again and negotiate another agreement so that we can organise a situation in which fishing in these waters will be viable?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think many of the arguments we've heard are valid, especially the legitimate demands from Mauritanian fishermen to be able to develop their professional activity. And also there are the interests of the European fishermen who are concerned about jobs being lost. This agreement could lead to a great number of fishermen remaining in port, as has been the case in recent months in Europe. And the thing is, we don't have a set of figures agreed to by both sides with respect to cephalopods. I think here we need a clear and undisputed picture of what resources are available. Otherwise, we're not going to have a well-founded agreement which everybody can sign up to and agree to. So I'm repeating some of the questions now, but I think we need some clarity here. I think we need, to look at the most recent estimates for cephalopod stocks, and also we need an assessment of the impact of this obligation to land, the way that has been negotiated, taking into account the interests of Mauritanian workers and indeed European workers, so that both can find themselves ultimately in a situation in which they are sheltered from unfavourable social impacts and in fact have the social situation improved. Mrs. Miranda. Well, thank you, Chair. I'm also from a fishing nation, obviously one of the biggest in Europe. And of course, this is a major national interest for us, especially small-scale fisheries, but also other kinds of fishing as well, pelagic, demersal, and so on and so forth. We have to bear in mind the interests of our countries, my country, and indeed the interests of Mauritania, of course. Now, we depend a lot for our octopus fisheries on Mauritania, and octopus is very much part of our culinary traditions, certainly in my country, and octopus has, in a way, to a great extent, shaped our fisheries in Spain. So I have questions for the experts. I'd like to hear again from you what you feel about the state of octopus fisheries in Mauritania. Mauritania, it seems, has made concessions to other countries with respect to octopus fisheries, not the European Union, allowing them to fish octopus at a time when octopus fisheries, it would appear in Mauritanian waters, are being very badly managed. There seems to be a contradiction here to me. Thank you. Right, I think that concludes the first round of questions. So let's now have the first round of responses, and I hope the speakers can be as specific as possible in their comments. I don't mind who goes first. If you put your hand up, if you'd like to come back with your responses. Mr. Kayar, first of all. Thank you, Chairman. Well, there's a lot of questions being put on the state of the octopus stocks. I refer to studies done in 2009 and 2010. These are international studies undertaken by COPAS, which is an FAO organisation. That's the IMROP working group. Now, I am not familiar with all the details of the WEO research, which will give us perhaps more details. But I know that the European Scientific and Technical Fisheries Committee did assess this research, and this particular piece of research was looking at an alternative method of managing octopus stocks in order to see if one couldn't perhaps close off zones for certain periods in order to achieve an overall better management system. And that's not a stock evaluation study, of course. That's a study into alternative management systems. Nevertheless, in this agreement, I think what we now need to do is to organise a first meeting of the Joint Scientific Committee. That is the committee set up by the agreement, and that committee, I think, should get to work and evaluate the octopus stocks impartially as soon as possible, so that we can come up with a final set of figures which we believe we can rely upon. So I think that would be the first thing to do with respect to octopus. Second point, Mrs. Lövin asked us about the environmental impacts of the agreement and the environmental impact in particular of the European fleet. Well, the European fleet is rather similar in many ways to the Mauritanian fleet. The trawling does not have such a major impact on the environment. It fishes various different species, but it's not bottom trawling. Now, in the case of Mauritania, they have 100 vessels fishing cephalopods on an industrial basis, whereas we only have 30 European vessels fishing cephalopods in Mauritanian waters. That is the proposal. So where we could stress cooperation in the future could be in trying to achieve more selectivity, which has been the poor relation in our negotiations so far. If we make sure, or try and make sure, that vessels are more selective, I think we could diminish their environmental impact. No one fleet is more damaging in its fishing than another in this respect, but somehow I think we could achieve an improvement through negotiation. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'd like to say some words of reassurance to my friends in the European Parliament. Could I point out, though, first of all, that the octopus is a strategic species for Mauritania. And at the moment, no foreign fishers are authorised to fish octopus in our waters. And this applies to European fishermen, Senegalese fishermen, and so on and so forth, fishermen from the Gambia. They are not allowed to take on aboard any octopus from our waters. And this is something you can check and control. You can look at what the vessels are catching, look at the landings in Maribo. So what we're trying to do at the moment is keep this particular activity exclusive to Mauritanian fishermen. So we have no foreign vessels fishing octopus in our waters. As far as I know, nobody in Mauritania, in fact, is authorised to fish octopus, and that includes the many Chinese people we have in Mauritania at the moment. So we are absolutely against octopus fishing in our waters. Pelagic fishing is a totally different kettle of fish, so to speak. We have copious stocks in pelagic species, and there we have various agreements with various foreign fleets for pelagic fishing. But for octopus, the rule is no foreign vessels allowed. Now, the second point, or second problem I'd like to deal with is this. We now have this European financing programme, which applies also to our vessels, which may or may not fish octopus and pelagic species. So there is no particular problem for Mauritania. We have the finance. And when we talk about developing small-scale fishing, we're not just talking about small-scale fishing development, we're talking about development in general. With €10,000, you can create 12 jobs. Now, our Oceanographic Institute assesses the situation every 4 years, and all the European experts we know are invited to become involved in this evaluation, and the last one was in 2010. And of course, we in the industry are involved in this assessment of the octopus fleet. And we are aware that we should never exceed 50,000 tonnes of octopus fished in a year. The last year measured was 27,000 tonnes. The last three IMROP reports said we have to reduce octopus fishing by 33 to 40%. Now, the octopus fishing period is May-June, as you know, with absolutely no octopus fishing as of September, which is the breeding season. So that's a period when there's no fishing at all. It's the breeding season, the growing season, from September to the following spring. And on this, there is scientific agreement. And that particular arrangement is very well managed because what we're trying to do is conserve our stocks, and we're trying to protect our maritime environment. And we believe that we're now improving the situation of octopus in our waters thanks to these measures. It's not as in the old days when we had 2,000 tonnes of octopus being fished every day. So the amount of octopus fishing has been drastically reduced. And we can say now that our octopus stocks are recovering and are achieving a state of what I would describe as good health. This is thanks to the measures we've taken, closing down zones systematically at the request of the industry, at the request of fishermen, in order to conserve our octopus stocks. It's difficult for small-scale Mauritanian fishermen to fish anything other, in cases of those who are specialised, anything other than octopus, and to switch to pelagic. Now, of course, we're under pressure because we have people like the Chinese building factories in Mauritania saying, go out and get more fish for us to process. But these are pressures which we have to resist. And what I'm saying is we have to achieve development, overall development, so that we have jobs for our people, both at sea and on the land. So in this respect, this is a very important agreement, because if we don't have a sound agreement, we won't have this development for the country and for our fisheries. And it's important, therefore, that we have local people benefiting from this agreement so that we can establish a viable industry, a processing industry in our country, in partnership with our European colleagues. We have to also be very careful about bycatches. I mean, 50% of the vessels in our waters are fishing excessively in terms of the bycatch, which is illegal. So what we need here is partnership, true partnership, balanced partnership, transparent partnership. This is important. Now, thank you very much, says the chairman. You've more than answered the questions put to you, and thank you very much for that. But I do have to cut you off because we are short of time. But thank you very much for your comment. Mr. Garat.
Muchas gracias. Me uno.
Thank you. Well, I do support what the representative of the small-scale fisheries in Mauritania said. And I don't want this to be seen as a war between the Mauritanian fleet and the European fleet. And we certainly accept all the rights of the Mauritanian fleet, the small-scale fleet, and we wish them all the best. But we don't like to hear that the investments of the European Union in Mauritania haven't been enjoyed or seen by the small-scale vessel as being important. I mean, they're looking at the Chinese and the Japanese. And if you go to Nouakchott or Nadibu, you see that there are people thanking the Japanese and the Chinese for their investments, and they don't thank us. And what we've done then has served no purpose. Well, I'm going to try to answer the two questions that have been asked. First, from Mrs. Levine, concerning the IEO report and what it talked about. And I'd like to draw a distinction between the state of octopus or cephalopods and then whether there's surplus or not and whether the European fleet ought to go there. Now, concerning the first, the report presented by the Spanish Ocean Africa Institute, where they presented a model of a space exclusion, if you will, not only for the European floats, but where we had to take account of the European fleet and the small-scale local fleet. This was presented to the Joint Scientific Committee, and what it said is if they took certain management measures preventing fisheries at certain points of the year, certain times of the year, for both, what they would achieve would be a potential of production of octopus of 60,000 tons, more than the double of what's being fished right now. That's one thing. And what we're trying to urge the Mauritanian authorities to do, and the small-scale fleet, is to they apply this space exclusion because they're going to produce a lot more than what they're producing now. Because of the practice of both, the capacity of production is not what it ought to be. And I'd like to recall, too, that the small-scale vessels normally can't fish in zones of more than 2 meters, and most of the time this is not outside the 6 knot zone. Now, in our case, and we're talking about a potential of 60,000 tons, it would be sufficient if they said 6 knots, and this would be a small quantity in relation to the capacity production. And we think that we could live together, both the small-scale fleet and ours that has its base in Galicia and the Canary Islands. I would respect them as well. Now, the other report is the analysis that the SOI made with its own data through the observation of the samples and the catches of the situation of the stock in 2012. And here it says that the situation is very favorable and goes along the lines of what our experts said, a positive increasing tendency. And if you see this on the graphs, you see that in recent years there's quite an increase in the catches of octopus. And this increase isn't because they've changed the fisheries. It's the same model, but there's just a lot more octopus. So what I would urge you is what our expert said, that immediately to clear things up, because people are saying different things, that the Joint Scientific Committee, where the Mauritanians participate and the European experts participate, that they get together as quickly as possible and they give their opinion, their report on the state of the octopus. Now, we also need to know whether the Mauritanian government then wants, if there's a theoretical surplus, whether this should be fished by the Europeans or not. Now, that's a different kettle of fish, and we'd have to respect that. But what we're saying is that if there is a surplus, of course, we'd like to be able to fish it and not leave it to others like the Chinese. Now, maybe there's no Chinaman fishing here now, but there were 5 vessels which the Chinese had invested in who were fishing it. And now the second question is what do we do now? Do we renegotiate? Or can there be some correction of this agreement? What we'd like to see if it could be as soon as possible that the Commission and Mauritania would sit around the table, again being aware of the real problems and which have forced our companies and our ship owners not to go fish, to solve the technical problems and to come back with an improved agreement. And if this isn't possible because legal it isn't possible, then we're going to have to refuse this agreement and renegotiate another, because even if they say that we have to try this, if a ship owner knows he is just going to lose money, none of our vessels are going to go there. I mean, this is true for cephalopod, for pelagic, for shellfish, and vessels are tied up in port. Now, in Spain, these vessels are getting AIDS, but this is going to come to an end, and these ship owners and these vessels are going to have to disappear, and this would be really sad for ports like Marín or Vigo or Las Palmas if this happened. Thank you very much.
Señor Van Balthor.
Mr. Van Balthor.
Thank you, Chair. Very short. I haven't seen any questions to my argument and my introduction, so I think it's clear. Just one remark to what I hear my Mauritanian colleague said once, I think, or twice in a remark, that the pelagics bycatch cephalopods. Well, I just know my own fleet of about 7 trawlers normally active in Mauritania during the year. We are well controlled and we have always observers on board, and there never have been instances of bycatch of cephalopods. So I think I just wanted to make this clear. I don't know if the gentleman meant to say this, but anyway, I took it as it was. We don't have bycatch in cephalopods in our pelagic fisheries. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Well, thank you very much. Well, once this debate has been concluded, and I do thank you very much because it shed light on our lantern, I'd like to thank our experts, and we're going to continue another 20 or 25 minutes with the second part of this debate, which is the actual presentation of the report, my report, on this matter. And I'm going to let the Vice Chair chair while I go down into the room.
Okay. I hope I won't make the same mistakes according to names as last time. And then last time I also tried to keep sort of tabs on myself, so I didn't participate in the discussion this time. I think I have to at the very end. But we start with giving the rapporteur his turn. So the floor is yours, Matt.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. While we've had 2 or 3 exchanges of views on this matter, so we've had a lot of discussions, and we've had good discussions, and today too we've had a very enlightening debate on this matter. So I'm going to be brief, restricting myself to 3 points which I think are fundamental and which sum up my whole report. First of all, I would like to say categorically that I do want a fisheries agreement with Mauritania. And I want this agreement because I think it's good for Mauritania and good for the European Union. But I don't want this agreement. I think that this agreement, as we've said many times, is not a good agreement. It's a poor agreement. And we've seen this in many respects. Now, of course, this is the most important fisheries agreement in terms of volume and variety of species, but it's also with the highest financial contribution, 17 million euro, plus the contribution in terms of the licenses to be paid by the sector. And despite all that, the sector doesn't want it. They're not utilizing the fishing opportunities which are being given to them. So this at least has
to make us stop and think about whether the sector that this is intended for doesn't want it, then something must be wrong. And I say the fisheries sector that it's intended for, and then I go on to the second point that I want to make very clear, because we cannot lose sight of the fact that this is a fisheries agreement. A fisheries agreement. This is a fundamental subject that we often forget. And even today, well, we forgot this. So this is a fisheries partnership agreement, and the protocols derived from this partnership agreement, which are extremely commercial in the fisheries area. They're not cooperation, development, cooperation agreements, or any other type of agreement. Among other things, because this is our mandate under the treaty. The treaty indicates that we have to have objectives of development cooperation, and this is based on Article 208 on the treaty. And then it talks about fisheries agreements separately in Article 218. So an agreement where in counterpart for a contribution you get certain fishing opportunities. And that's where we have to decide whether the agreement is good or not. And I think we have to forget any other different factor that doesn't have to do with the fisheries. And of course, the agreement itself does involve a significant quantity, €3 million, 8 million less than last time, because they hadn't channeled the money properly. And this would be for development. And then, of course, in committees like DEVE, their attitude has to be quite different from what ours is. Now, thirdly, I've said this many times before, this agreement, this protocol, is very negative for the European Union, but it's also negative for Mauritania, given that the fleet isn't going to fish. Now, I'm not going to go into everything because we've seen it all, but in the report you see that I question the legal basis, and this is a question of formalities, because it's strange how the Commission and Council have changed the legal base to eliminate the reference to 43.2 as is usual for this type of agreement, and eliminated 2 to just leave 43, something, and you know what we think about this, and this is one more reason to say that we don't like this approach in this report, in this agreement. But I want to talk about two fundamental aspects. First, that the agreement offers lesser fisheries opportunities than the last agreement, and in worse conditions. And the agreement is extremely expensive for the European Union and for the sector. And we've heard this clearly, which sees how the licenses they're going to have to pay for are increasing dramatically. You can talk about 400 or 700% or 27% anyway. In any case, it's certainly very high in consider the fishing opportunities that are being offered. And this has been made very clear. Now, concerning cephalopods, well, this is clearer than any other case. There's no access to this type of fisheries, even though they're planning to revise this after a year. But that's an operative. Well, this means that we're questioning the very revision, because, I mean, in an agreement which has taken 15 months to negotiate and is supposed to last 2 years, well, Commission, you're going to have to start negotiating already this revision of the agreement if you're going to spend another 15 years negotiating. But this revision, I think, it couldn't possibly be done within a year when the financial contribution has already been paid, €70 million, to which we can add the possibility of cephalopod fisheries. Well, from a Mauritanian point of view, we'd be talking about another financial contribution, a different one, quite a different one. So I don't think this will take place. And what's the result? Well, the 32 vessels of the European Union don't have fishing grounds and don't have any alternatives. But the most serious thing, and we've heard this here today clearly, is that this ban has been confirmed by scientific evidence from 2010, which are really from 2009 or 2008, and which are obsolete along the lines of what we've been seeing in relation to the present scientific reports. Now, the state of the stocks is as bad as it would seem. They might be at MSY levels, especially after the effort that's been made in earlier years of, well, about 30%. So I think that if at one time we could talk about overfisheries of octopus, as we talked about in the Parliament's resolution, today this statement is obsolete, and at the same time, as now the Commission thought that they ought to prevent the EU fleet fishing for cephalopods for this reason, and then they've been changing their minds and indicating this, that saying that it's not overfishing, but that the Mauritanian authorities want to keep these fishing opportunities for their own fishermen. Well, I don't know if this is a reality or not. And what I can say clearly is that I certainly support the idea that the small-scale vessels ought to have access to these resources, but there are sufficient resources to exploit the biomass of octopus as it is available today. Now, concerning pelagic fisheries, the shifting outward of the fishing grounds without increasing the fishing opportunities, of course, does take us aback and means that if we add this situation to the rest of the conditions, like the landing in Mauritania and the transshipment, the distribution of the 2%, which even the local people have questioned, means that this fleet is seriously damaged. And I'd like to make a brief reference to the Canary Islands for obvious reasons, especially this obligation of landing in Mauritania, because this really seriously damages the economy and employment in a region of Europe which has unemployment rates of more than 36%. I'm talking about 2,750 jobs related to the sector, and with port activities of about 40,000 euros. But I'd like to add from the point of view of the EU that it doesn't make sense that the European Union, that's invested a lot in infrastructure and in these ports of Eleuth and Las Palmas, well, the same European Union now is dooming these infrastructures to disappear, infrastructures which they've invested in. Now, demersales and shellfish, well, same thing. I think because of a shortage of time, I hardly need repeat that this shifting of the fishing grounds represents a loss of profitability for the sector, given that in the coastal areas, of course, you had most of the shell fisheries, especially of Norway lobster. And we can say that there aren't really scientifically based reasons for changing the fishing zone. Now, tuna. Well, I'm not going to talk about this because the conditions didn't change, so we don't have to refer to that. And then there was one other aspect, which was the fact that the agreement is extremely costly for the EU and inviable for the sector. This is an agreement of about 110 million euro. Well, 67 million plus 3 for sectoral support. And, well, I mean, we can do this if really in compensation for this, there were some fishing opportunities that were viable for the sector. But the most important thing in this report and in this agreement of the position that the agreement is intended for. I mean, it's of course intended for Mauritania and the fishery sector and the European fleet. And the European fleet has clearly stated that they don't want it. And this is agreement. I mean, the Commission is going to have to explain why, right from the beginning, they accepted a financial contribution of 70 million euro, the same as up to now, but without octopus. And of course, I'm not questioning the rights of the Mauritanians here, but how can this still cost 70 million euros still with lower fishing opportunities? Now, there are sections where the license fee is going up, and that also makes this unviable for the sector. This is fisheries that's not profitable. The utilization of it is about zero, and the sector doesn't like the agreement. Now, what's a shame is that we're discussing this here today when this sector said this before the negotiations were concluded to the Commission, and the Commission just ignored them. So I'd like to conclude. Now we can debate this. If people have any specific questions, repeating that once we've had this hearing today, which I think has been extremely interesting, not only would I like to confirm all the points of my report, but I'm even more convinced. And I think we still have time to not continue with an agreement which is bad for the European Union and fundamentally bad for Mauritania. Thank you.
Gracias, Senor Mato.
Thank you very much.
There was a lot of question to the Commission. Would the Commission want to intervene at this stage, or shall we go to the debate? In that case, that is Mr. Sanchez. Please, the floor is yours.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm not going to repeat a lot of the things that Mr. Mato has said. I do support most of what he's said and most of his concerns. I would have liked to have seen today to support the signing of this agreement with Mauritania, but unfortunately, I still have a lot of doubts to be able to support this agreement. I think the agreement has to be renegotiated. Now, one question is aid to development, and then another thing are fisheries agreements, and the financing of development cooperation doesn't have any counterpart for the European Union. I think that the European Union has to continue cooperating with Mauritania and do it unconditionally. Just that making certain that development aid meets its purpose. But a fisheries agreement needs more. It has to be based on transparency, has to be based on a balance between balance of sustainability and the sustainable development of the fisheries sector. Now, in relation to transparency, it's clear that we've cleared up a lot of the doubts that we did have. There are doubts about the state of the stocks, but there's also the evidence that there are private agreements that the Mauritanian authorities have reached. So it's difficult for us to say clearly to the Commission that when they sign that the EU will have priority over any other fleet from a third state. Well, we don't know what the content of these private agreements are between the Mauritanian agreements and third parties, and that affect the development of the agreement that has to be carried out under its terms. And then concerning the cephalopods, I'd like to say this, but anyway, concerning sustainability, we have to know what the state of the stocks is. In this case, what's clear that this is agreement that's going to make possible a lower access to resources than before, and we have to know what the counterpart for this is, and if there's been an increase in the administrative fees, and, well, there's maybe too much overlapping in the vessel monitoring too, and, well, the obligation of buying fuel in Mauritania, and there are other technical measures that don't contribute to sustainability. All they are higher costs for our companies who are being told to fish less and to make a greater economic effort. So this isn't reasonable, and therefore it's not satisfactory. I think we'll have to look at the technical conditions and to see that all operators have to meet these for all
for all the people fishing these resources, they have to have equal rules. And then thirdly, sectoral development. One of the problems of this agreement is that what we're reducing is the fisheries sector. We're not capable of making certain that the Mauritanian authorities can take advantage of the resources for fisheries development. This is what's being reduced here. So, and I'd like to refer to the cephalopods because this is what most affects my community. Now, some time ago, we approved the report on the CFP, and this is a great success. And Rapporteur Rose, one of the things he introduced was the precautionary policy of having limits. So we shouldn't accept an agreement that would send home 24 vessels because you don't know what the situation is. There is a limit because of the precautionary principle. You can't go from all to nothing from one year to the next. But I would like to point out, first of all, what we know from the past. Well, I've got the 2 reports of the Scientific and Technical Committee which refers to 2012 and refers to the meeting in Agadir in 2010, and the latest data refers to 2009, recognizing that there is an increasing production. But the fundamental data points out that there's a small-scale fisheries fleet, and of course we support the development, but there are 200 freezer trawlers under the Mauritanian flag, but they're in fact from other countries. So what's happening here is that this mechanism is being used to not to protect the small-scale fleet, but to introduce other fleets to fish the resources. But if we adopted a resolution in May 2011, then in June there was supposed to be an overfisheries. You remember that the scientific committee with old data said that this had to be reduced but not eliminated, that is to say, the activity in the sector. On the 6th of June, they reached an agreement with a Chinese company on cephalopods. So this doesn't correspond to the position of the Parliament nor to the situation of the stocks. So when you exclude the European fleet from cephalopods, what we're doing is give fisheries licenses to vessels from this Chinese company. But now, apparently a few days ago, these licenses were suspended, and I don't know if it's because of the criticisms the European Union has made of the Mauritanian authorities, but we don't know what the private agreements are in any case. And of course, we consider that we have to assess the stocks again. We have to immediately assess the stocks because we can't continue to be in a situation where 24 or 30 some European vessels who were carrying out this fishery have been banned without any gradual reduction or no recent assessment of the stocks. That's totally unacceptable. So we think it's necessary to revise the situation immediately and that we apply the precautionary principle that we've been defending in general and that we revise the agreement so that we could support it because we have serious objections and otherwise we can't accept it.
We are again running against the clock, so please try to be as short as possible. The next on the speakers list is Mr. Romeo, please.
Gracias. Yo de hecho voy a ser muy breve.
Well, I'll be very brief. Firstly, because I want to hear from the Commission. I want to listen to the Commission in particular, and I hope they'll speak. And secondly, I'd just like to reassert what my colleague Kriton Arsenis made just now. We're faced here with an agreement. It's the first time we have an agreement where we see a lot of the principles being incorporated that we wanted. So it is a good precedent for starting discussion under good terms. But in this case, I think it's necessary also to acknowledge for the first time we're doing things, we're negotiating and concluding an agreement under the conditions that we wanted. But secondly, I understand that octopus is a sensitive issue. It affects a lot of fleets, but we've heard a very clear message from the Mauritanian fishermen, and they're making it quite clear that they want octopus to remain excluded from the agreement, but nothing much else can be added to this issue. They said what they want, and I don't think there's much margin for discussion given what they want, but I have the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, but having listened to the various rapporteurs, the various experts, I don't think there is a great deal of margin for a plan B here either. Some people are asking for a renegotiation of this fisheries partnership agreement, asking the Commission and the Mauritanian authorities to renegotiate, but I don't think that's possible. I don't think there is much margin of manoeuvre for a renegotiation. I hope the Commission can shed some light on that.
Fru Lövin, varsågod.
Tack, herr ordförande.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, I'd just like to echo what my colleague just said, that the Mauritanians have been extremely clear here now that it's the octopus category is what they want to use for themselves, and the fact that they've managed to get their government to listen to them is something we have to support. And that they've also managed to take this a second step and take away the licenses from the Chinese trawlers. I mean, this is a major achievement, and I would like to say that I think the EU Commission and this Parliament with its resolution has supported that major step for the Mauritanian fishermen themselves. So this is exactly what we wanted to achieve with our external dimension of this common fisheries policy. And as Mr. Romeva said, it's a mistake to believe that renegotiation is possible. We could read in all the fisheries news magazines that there are a number of players out there who want access to West African fishing waters. And a few weeks ago, there was an article about the new Russian policy. And the Russians are really looking for fishing opportunities in West Africa right now. And if we would suspend, or if we would not ratify this agreement, I believe that that would really open up for other players that are less responsible and who indeed does not have these principles of sustainability as we've agreed in this Parliament that we should have, and also the Council has in its Council conclusions on the external policy. And the Council has in fact said yes to this agreement and to the ratification of the agreement, and I think the Parliament should as well. And one other very good thing that this agreement has introduced is the non-discrimination clause, which is not mentioned by Mr. Mato in his report. But in fact, it says that all the other the third countries that should fish in Mauritanian waters should apply by the same technical limitations and rules as the EU fleet, which has also led that all the other fleets have been pushed further out from the coastal zone to 20 nautical miles. This is really good. And I think what the EU is doing, this is something that struck me the other day when I was reading the news about the war in Mali, and we know that Al-Qaeda is also present in this region. It's a very sensitive moment in history, and I mean, the EU is not doing itself any good by kind of upsetting local populations in the region right now. And not at any time, I would say, but especially now, we need to make sure that the EU is perceived as a responsible partner, and a partner in its real sense, and an attractive partner in the future when it comes to fisheries and other things. And really, this is the competitive advantage that the EU actually could have in the future when we have other players like Russia, China, Korea, and others that are not as appreciated. As we heard from the President Sid Ahmed here from the artisanal fishing sector, he says that he welcomes the EU. He thinks we have been very sustainable in our negotiations, and this is something we really should appreciate. And if the European Parliament now said no to this agreement, this would really be a huge mistake on how the EU would be perceived in this region. Thank you.
Thank you. And next on the speakers list is Madame Miranda, please.
Thank you, President. Un acuerdo de estas...
Well, an agreement of this type should be fair and fair for everyone. A lot of people have been saying this. We don't want an agreement based on discrimination, but it has to be fair for all those parties involved, not just for some of the parties. And that's a basic demand that hasn't been respected. This protocol has failed in various areas when it comes to participation of the sector, when it comes to the social dimension, and it hasn't taken into account either the socio-economic consequences of excluding part of the fleet. This is going to have serious repercussions for employment, not just when it comes to the cephalopod fleet from my country, but also when it comes to the Mauritanian fleet, but also the Mauritanian crews. Will there be more safety with the Chinese fleets, and will there be greater safety, better socio-economic conditions with the Chinese fleets instead of the European fleets? I don't think so. And then there's this question of the miles, the exclusion zone. And when it comes to the European cephalopod fleet, it can't compete because it can't enter the same fishery zones. And so the idea that there is that there should be a fair protocol, a fair fisheries partnership agreement, I'd like to reassert that it has to be fair for everyone. It has to be fair for the Mauritanian small-scale fishermen, but we want to reassert as well that the Mauritanian small-scale fishermen fleet have to have good conditions. They have to have appropriate processing plants on land. They have to, and that will also have to be good conditions and appropriate conditions for the European fleet. At the moment, there will be discrimination and there will be a lack of equality. I represent citizens from my country. I represent the interests of the citizens of my country. I'm speaking on their behalf here, and we. Obviously, we need to be aware about development. We have to be aware about international issues. We have to be aware about the needs of less favoured nations and their populations. But at the moment, we see a lot of damage being done, a lot of social impact for more than 400 people living in my region. So that there's lots of economic damage being done. There are no fishing alternatives for some of these crews. So these crews are resting. They're not at sea. This is affecting Moraz, part of my constituency. So this is having devastating economic consequences for Europe. So a lot is being lost in this fisheries sector. So it's necessary for the Commission, before it pays its financial contribution through through using European tax. Well, I think first of all it should go to the Joint Scientific Committee, have another look at the state of the stocks, but also we need to ensure that Galicia, which is dependent on the outcome of this agreement, it's important that the Commission ensure that the fishermen of Galicia have a future. Many of us here agree that there should be an agreement, but it has to be a fair agreement and an agreement that's fair for all. So if you look at the way in which it's been negotiated, I think that has to be rejected because it gives fewer fishing opportunities, although it costs more for the European Union. Obviously, Mauritania has the right to develop its fisheries sector, but you have to create the right sort of partnership with the European Union, but you can't have the EU just coughing up, just spending its taxpayers' money while hundreds of our fishermen are redundant and the vessels are in port and can't fish. I'm here to represent the fishermen of Galicia. Some of them have been dependent now on aid, on assistance for 5 months now, and some of their representatives have come along to the committee to listen to this debate, and I think we need to listen to them as well. We need to hear what they've got to say. So I think we have to say no to an agreement under these conditions, and what we want are agreements that are fair and fair for all. Thank you.
The next on the speakers list is Madame Fraga, please.
Sí, bueno, yo comento.
Well, I'll try to be quicker than before. I think there's a certain amount of cynicism in the way people are using arguments relating to octopus, for example. What was said in the European Parliament in the past when it came to octopus fishing was that there was overfishing, and we said in the past that we needed different fisheries conditions under this protocol. But the data that was used comes from 2008, but now the stock is recovering. So now we've got to change the argument. Now the problem isn't overfishing. The problem is that these stocks are now supposed to be reserved just for the Mauritanians. Of course, the Mauritanians can do what they like with their fish stocks, but the problem is that in the fisheries protocol, there is zero TAC for cephalopods, but the idea that was dependent on the idea of improving the stock. But I don't think. But the stock has improved. The idea was that if the stock situation improved, then there would be a TAC. So I think we need to look at how the Commission has worked, what it's done, how it's acted. So we need to hear from the if there is this zero TAC linked to the fact that we need to ensure an improvement in the stock. But if the stock has improved, then surely the TAC should increase. And when it comes to negotiation and renegotiation, well, Mr. Guilford said very clearly that they were ready to make improvements through the joint scientific committee. And this was said here. I don't know whether it was behind closed doors or publicly, but we were told that this is the only agreement we could get, and it couldn't be negotiated. But I want to hear from the Commission. I'd like to know whether it has the intention of doing anything on the joint scientific committee. We're hearing contradictory things. You say you're going to improve technical conditions on the joint scientific committee. On the other hand, you're saying this is the best possible agreement we could hope to get. And what is it? It's costing 70 million. And when you've got only 4, 5 or 6 boats fishing, well, I think, as my colleague said, I think that's not a good bargain if you've got 4, 5 or 6 boats fishing and it costs you 70 million. Well, I think that's excessive. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next on the list is Madame Bilbao, please.
Sí, gracias. Sí.
Thank you very much. Well, before the Commission speaks, I would like a reply from them on 2 questions. Having heard from the sector and having heard from the different political groups in this Parliament, I'd like to know whether the Commission thinks it's possible to get a comprehensive analysis of the stock situation for octopus. Do you have credible data at your fingertips, or should there be a meeting of the Joint Scientific Committee? What data did they use? If you're not convening the Joint Scientific Committee, if you're not ready to renegotiate, I'd like the Commission to tell us whether it has assessed the negative consequences this agreement could have for the sector if this protocol is implemented. At the moment, there are 1,200 people who are unemployed. Companies were just closing down, and if this is a consequence for the sector, well, I'd like to know what strategy the Commission has and what exit solutions does it have, what ways out, what solutions does it have for these vessels that won't have any fishing grounds at all. What's your way out for that problem? Thank you.
Thank you. I put myself on the list as promised, and I actually thought to start with a small confession. I think the formula in confessions is that I, pure and sinful human being, have since the last meeting of the Fisheries Committee committed the following sins. The sin I was actually almost on the verge of committing was I had a small red figure on my left shoulder saying that, okay, go vote for a no, and then they won't be fishing there for the next few years. And then we'll probably come back to the negotiation table with a more sort of adjusted look at things. But I decided to try to be a good human being, and that means that we have to vote for the agreement because all the other options are actually worse. And if you go through all the arguments, and we have heard them for a couple of times, I think there are lots of argument in favor of this agreement. One of the arguments is actually from Rudyard Kipling, that's White Man's Burden. I think we should be very, very, very careful when we go and say what Mauritania should do in this case. I think that's morally speaking, a fairly slippery road. So even if I know that there are lots of problems, and when we listen to the discussion here, I think the underpinning problem of all what was said is that we have a lot of social and economic problems in part of Europe, and we should take care of them, and we should be able to address them. But to address them through the fisheries agreement with Mauritania is, in a way, that's the wrong way. Now Davis is trying to get a speech, so I will cut my part of the speech very short if Chris promises to keep his even shorter. Thank you.
I will indeed, Chairman, and I apologise. I've spent a lot of time sitting on an airport tarmac in the snow today.
You didn't live in England.
No, we're not prepared like the Finns are. Just a question. Okay, people don't like the agreement. Many people have voiced concerns. But, basically, we're not getting good value for money. Not enough products for the amount we're paying. I just want to know, and this may have been touched on before, but I just want to know from the Commission about the competitive environment. I mean, if it's not us, who gets the agreement? If it's not us, who would pay for the fish? Have we gone into negotiations knowing there are other bidders out there and been screwed, or have we got a good deal? Thank you.
Thank you. There are lots of questions for the Commission, so I think it would be fair to give Mr. Berg a possibility to answer those questions, and then we'll see how we proceed. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, it's always a challenge to answer most of these questions, or deal with. You could even say attacks on the way we negotiated this agreement with Mauritania. But I'll try to deal with the questions. I think we're all aware of what's at stake here, how important this is as a debate. We know what's at stake when it comes to the European fleet. We know what's at stake when it comes to Mauritania, and we know how it concerns quite a few member states, not just one or two, but 12 member states that fish off the coast of Mauritania. But obviously, there's a regional dimension. We are aware of the impact we are aware of the impact this will have on the Canaries and on Galicia. Well, this agreement has been negotiated and initialed. It's not a perfect agreement, I admit, but above all, it is in line with the negotiating mandate that was given to us by the Council of the European Union, and it's in line with the resolutions adopted by the European Parliament, and in particular when it comes to the following points: limiting fishing opportunities, and also taking into account the state of the stocks. some stocks covered by the past protocol had been subject to overfishing, or there'd been full fishing. So that was the state of play. A number of experts have reasserted that there was this is a factual observation. The past protocol wasn't long-term enough. It wasn't sustainable enough, so we had to adjust it. And in the negotiations, we also had to take into account demands from the Mauritanian side relating to their small-scale fleet, and I'd like to thank the president of the Mauritanian Fisheries Federation, thank him for coming along today, and he's talked about freeing up the fisheries sector so it becomes viable for Mauritanian fishermen, local fishermen. So we've got to take into account local consequences as well, the local impact. That's something we have to take into account. That was always at the heart of the demands from the Mauritanian side. I'd also like to recall that we are totally in line with the principles of the reform. That's an issue that hasn't been raised at all today, but there's the human rights clause, which is as of now in all fisheries agreement, and it's in this protocol with Mauritania as well. And then there's an article that's important in our eyes. That's the first article, paragraph 4, which talks about the priority for access for European fleets. That's an important point, and obviously this is important when it comes to different sorts of fisheries, in particular pelagic fisheries. I'll come back to that because there are details I want to report to you relating to the different sorts of fisheries covered by the agreement. Before that, I'd like to touch upon a subject that's been raised several times today. That is the question of the cost of the agreement and the level of financial contribution which offsets this agreement. We've been told it's a very expensive agreement given the fishing opportunities now being offered to the European side. And I'd like to recall a number of facts here, genuine facts, obvious facts. There's a mention of a reduction from 76 to 70 million euros, so that the overall European financial contribution has gone down, but there hasn't been an overall reduction of fishing opportunities, because it's true there is a zero TAC for cephalopods, but you shouldn't forget that when it comes to pelagic fisheries, we're going from 250,000 tonnes to 300,000 tonnes. So the offer for the European fleet for pelagic fisheries is higher, much higher than it was in the past protocol. And it's true that there is a mechanism to go from 250,000 to 300,000 tonnes in the past protocol. There was a possibility of additional catches, but that was something which meant extra expenditure, extra payments. So when you're talking about fishing opportunities before and after, you have to take this factor into account as well. I'd also like to say that when it comes to the period covered by the last protocol, 2007 will be my reference year, the prices since then have gone up. If you look at the pelagic fisheries sector, we see an increase of about 15% between 2007 and 2011. So that's something you have to take into account when you're looking at the value of the agreement. And then the composition of the catches. If you look at the zoning imposed on us for pelagic fisheries, we've gone down from 13 to 20 miles. That has as a consequence that we can better target species with a higher value, horse mackerel and mackerel, leaving aside unlike the sardine and the sardinelle. And if you take as the average price for pelagic €600 a tonne, that was mentioned by an expert just now, that price applies above all to the sardine and the sardinelle, or the oil sardine. However, when it comes to the segments for the more precious species like horse mackerel, there it's almost a double, €1,200 a tonne. That explains that will explain the price of the agreement. And when it comes to the price that we're paying, there are two components, and one is the dues that are paid by ship owners. It's true that there's been a considerable increase here, and the increase is higher for certain segments of the fleet, for the pelagic fleet. So when it comes to, we try to adjust the rate of increase into account the different sorts of boats and the characteristics of the different fleets. So it's high, the fees are high for pelagic fisheries, but less high, much less high for other sorts of vessels. operating in these zones. And we've had many discussions with the pelagic fisheries industry. It's not the price that was mentioned first when there was criticism. First of all, it was the zoning or the technical conditions, but the pelagic industry itself acknowledges and admits that it's not the level of fees that is their first complaint, the first criticism of the agreement. And the figures that were mentioned by Mr. Kayar are interesting because it shows what the fees mean as regards the value of the catches, the ratio. When you look at the fees for shrimp fishermen, that's about 8% of the value of catches. When it comes to tuna fish, it's about 2% cost benefit, and when it comes to fees for pelagic fisheries, they represent 20% of the value of the catches. So that takes into account the price of the sardines, but it would be lower. It only takes into account sardines and sardinelles. It would be a lower ratio, lower cost-benefit ratio if you took into account the higher value of the horse mackerel. But I think that allows you to get a bit more balance back into the debate. And now, if you don't mind, I'd like to say something about the three big categories of fish that have been mentioned in the discussion. I'll start with the pelagic fishery, then I get on to the shrimpers, and then finally the cephalopods. When it comes to the pelagic fisheries, it's clear that there is a problem of overfishing of sardinelles. And perhaps the studies haven't been completely clear, but the Commission's desire is to apply the precautionary principle. We want to reduce the fishing effort in the area of sardinelles or oil sardine. And there was a point made by the Mauritanian fishermen, and that is you've got to look at the competition with national small-scale fishers when it comes to sardinelle. That's an important fish for them. And in the negotiations, we talked about a sub-quota for sardinelles, but that was refused by the fleets. And so we could have. There is a difficult result, which means that the fleet has to adjust, going from 13,000 to 20,000. But you have to take into account the fact that there are fleets that are able to adjust to the new situation. We've got 2 Baltic boats which are fishing at the moment in Mauritanian waters, and then other segments of the pelagic fleet perhaps don't have the same strategy, but they are able to adjust and benefit from the 300,000 tonnes which are available for that category. 300,000 tonnes, that corresponds precisely to the quantity that was requested by the industry. And then an important point that was made by some of the MEPs today is that the technical conditions which have been criticised so much relating to the pelagic fisheries are the same criteria for all fleets operating here. The Russians, the Ukrainians, the Asians, they're subject to the same technical conditions as the European fleets. Then we have a series of criticisms of the technical conditions. I don't want to go into too much detail here. But for example, there's the issue of transshipment and landings. It's clear that this provision in the protocol will be limited by the logistic capacities of the Nouadhibou port. There's some landings will take place there, but on the long term, it's more than likely that landings will take place in the sea lane near Nouadhibou, but then we'll shift to Las Palmas. And all the contacts we've had with the Mauritanians show that we don't have the processing industry there. We don't have enough of a market in Mauritania to process so much fish. So I'm not too worried about the impact of this activity on the port of Las Palmas. And then there are some questions such as the monopoly when it comes to the suppliers of fuel. That was mentioned in Mr. Matto's report, although it's not part of the provisions of the protocol. We just learned that this protocol has been abolished, so that's good news for the fleet. And we've also talked about donations in kind when it comes to having a double system for VMS. This was something that already existed to a certain extent in the previous protocol. Perhaps it hadn't been formalised, but there were obligations there that the fleets had to adjust to already. When it comes to the pelagic fisheries, we're convinced that we can use this agreement, we can benefit from this agreement. It's a question of shifting your strategy, it's a question of will, and in any case, it should be possible to exploit the opportunities of this protocol with the caveat that if there are obvious difficulties, but we won't know until people have started fishing. If there are obvious difficulties, there is the possibility, the obligation even, to talk about this with the Mauritanian party. And I'd just like to say that it is one of our intentions to organise a joint committee very soon with the Mauritanians. When it comes to shellfish and shrimps, there's a change in the zones there, which has consequences for the fleet, but it's fully justified by the negative impact that this fisheries activity could have and has had under the last protocol. But there's a compromise. 50% of the authorised boats can fish in this buffer zone between 6 and 8 nautical miles. So for us, that's a fishery which is perhaps more difficult, hard work, more onerous, but it is possible under the conditions of the protocol. And the contacts we've had with the Mauritanians show that there is a certain openness on their side to talk about technical conditions of this fishery and to have another look at the level of bycatches again, which is proposed for the vessels there, for the shrimpers. For the cephalopod boats, I'd like to recall you that there are Mauritanian vessels which are fishing cephalopods at the moment, as far as I know. I think that's been said. There are no Chinese boats or boats flying other flags. No, this is reserved for fish flying a Mauritanian flag. This is a political decision of Mauritania to take this choice and to give preference to national fishermen. We have to respect that as a decision of a sovereign state. And things can evolve. There are two aspects. There's the state of the fish stock, and then there are the political decisions, and there's the context of relations with a number of Chinese companies. It's true that the cephalopod stocks can evolve rather rapidly. It's a species which has a short life cycle and reproduction cycle, so things have improved because we ceased cephalopod fisheries since August, and the Commission had already said that we were ready to have another look at this in connection with the Mauritanian. We're ready to.
Avec des données récentes.
We're ready to have a look at the cephalopod stock again in order to update the scientific data and have another look at the scientific data that we used for the negotiation of the protocol.
L'étude.
Now, the Spanish Institute's research has been mentioned. Now, for us, that's not a scientific opinion. That's a management system with some interesting, attractive proposals, which could be implemented and subsequently approved by the Mauritanian authorities. So it's important to look at this. And what I can tell you today is that in the European Commission, our intention is to organise a joint scientific committee meeting as soon as possible, between now and the end of February. That's before the joint committee meeting, so that we can look at recent data, reliable data, on the cephalopods stocks. And then there's a political aspect. If the stocks have improved, then the Mauritanian government, the question is, would they accept giving us some of the surplus? We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, the Commission, as it often did in the negotiations, will ask for some of these cephalopod stocks, as long as this is in line with the priorities of the Mauritanian government and within the interests of the local fishermen. With respect to hake, we were asked why the quota has been fixed at 400,000 tonnes. Well, we looked at what we had in the previous protocol, 306,000 tonnes. We didn't want to upset anybody, and we just looked at past real take-up, past real use. In the past, the quota was expressed in gross tonnes, but we used tax. But basically, we used historic data. And then there's the question of who is fishing in the Mauritanian waters at the moment. Well, at the moment, we have 36 vessels with fishing licenses, or currently obtaining fishing licenses. That's a little higher than the figure mentioned during the debate. There are two vessels for blockade, 2 vessels for demersal species, and about 20 vessels fishing tuna, both longliners and so on. And there are 2 pelagic vessels, Lithuanian vessels, in fact, who are license holders, and they're now fishing in Mauritanian waters. So you have these 36 vessels, potential total 122. So at the moment, about a third of the potential fleet is fishing in the zone, in the region. So the protocol will be important for some member states, for part of this fleet. And if this protocol was rejected, this would have negative consequences for those parts of our fleet which are benefiting from the provisionally applicable protocol. Having said that, as I said, a joint committee meeting should be taking place on the 19th and 20th of February with the Mauritanians present, and there we want to have as much detail on the table as possible so that we can look at all the technical conditions we've been debating this afternoon. And there we want to cover all the ground, even difficult issues, obviously. So we want to have this joint committee meeting with the Mauritanians to talk about shrimpers, pelagic fishers, look at alternative solutions for zoning, and also we want to talk about bycatches, again zoning for species we don't debate very much, for example crab. We could perhaps consider with them rather more licenses, transferring different types of licenses in the tuna sector between longliners and trawlers and so on. So there's a whole series of issues on the agenda there, and in particular we'll be looking at cephalopods. The fate of those will depend very much on the debate in the joint committee. So I hope I've managed to give you as many facts as possible from the Commission's point of view. For us, by the way, we can't envisage a renegotiation, because that would mean we'd be starting all over again at zero. Fishing would have to stop, and that would have negative consequences for parts of the fleet, and also negotiations with a country such as Mauritania, from our experience, takes a year, 18 months. So we have a protocol which could last for 2 years, which could be well used by our vessels. We certainly want to improve it. So I think we have to keep things going and not stop dead without having some solid alternative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There was some reactions in the audience of opening the debate again. We won't go that way, but the Commission will get some sort of feeling of how the arguments went by the rapporteur, because he's going to have the last word. Please.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly then. Well, if the Commission had negotiated well, we wouldn't be in this situation, this difficult situation we're in now, in which perhaps we'd like to go backwards. And there's one question which struck me in particular during the debate. But first of all, let me thank all speakers, because nobody questioned my report. Certain nuances were expressed, for example, Mr. Romema's points. But I think now the Commission has largely covered the points raised during the debate, because the Commission has just told us it doesn't know why we're complaining, because there are going to be bigger quotas and we'll be able to fish more than before. Let's just leave aside the question of sustainability, having said that. Anyway, both the Commission and some of my colleagues attach enormous value to the Mauritanian position, and I respect that. But they haven't given the same value to the position of the European fleet. Now, don't forget that the Mauritanians have been very clear in negotiations, and so have the Europeans. The Mauritanians said something which struck me in particular. I basically said they're not too keen on this protocol, not much more to add. But the European fleet doesn't like the protocol very much either. But nevertheless, we all have to push forward together. Now, I would say there aren't enough arguments on either side to slow down negotiations or to stop negotiations. But having said that, I think we should be cautious about adding any more headings to this protocol. Certainly we have to take into account the interests of the local people, the local population, and we also have to take into account sustainability. This is in the interests of both sides, obviously, the local population, the local fishermen, and the European fleet. So let's see. Very quickly, the Commission said it had followed the Parliament's resolution in negotiations. And listen, the resolution of Parliament was there for specific reasons when it was adopted. And the Commission is well aware of this. In the meantime, there have been scientific reports which have come out since the resolution, which mean that the resolution is now out of date. And these reports covered the year 2009, and there were previous reports which showed clearly what the variation in stock had been, and showed clearly that the impact of overfishing still wasn't clear. The Commission said it had took into account the interest of the Mauritanians, their requests. It would have been a nice thing if the Commission had taken into account the demands and requests of the European fleet as well. I think it's this protocol, okay, it calls for respect of human rights, fine, but that's the least we can ask for in these kinds of agreements. So nothing special about that. And then, again, going back to the interests of the European fleet, the Commission said conditions should be the same for all fleets. Well, in the case of some fleets, the conditions are completely unacceptable. Now, we've been told that the pelagic quota has gone up to 300,000 from 240,000. Now, I don't know on the basis of which reports it made those proposals or achieved those figures. So I'd like to know how that happened. And in that particular case, what about sustainability? I think perhaps what the Commission could have done is drawn up an overall scenario, a management plan designed to guarantee sustainability for the most threatened species. On cephalopods, there we have the scientific research we should have taken into account, and on the other hand, the Mauritanians want cephalopods, octopus, for themselves only. Now, is there any point in negotiating on octopus and cephalopods with the Mauritanians? If their position is firmly zero for us, well, what's the point of negotiating? Or are we negotiating with them with an eye on the future? What is the Commission's approach there? And on shellfish, I wonder what reports the Commission was taking into account in its negotiations. The situation is more difficult for shell fishermen. Their activity is more expensive. And on hake, we're talking about 4,000 tonnes for 11 vessels. Well, with 2 vessels could fish 4,000 tonnes. So 4,000 tonnes for 11 vessels, that really doesn't hold water. Again, I find the Commission's position strange, because we only have 2 trawlers in the agreement, and it's rather a shame when the Commission says that part of the protocol, only part of the protocol will affect trawlers and the rest will not. I think this is rather strange. The thing is, for 1/3 of the fleet, and here we're talking about 14 vessels out of 123. I think, looking at this overall situation, we're paying rather a lot, 70 million euros for 14 vessels out of 123. And another question the Commission has to answer is this: has it paid the 70 million or not? And if it has, why has it hurried to pay when it had a 3-month period during which it could have held back payment? So I'll leave it at that, but just one final question, which I think is crucial to the whole debate, and I'd like a reply to this question. The thing is, no one's asked the Commission whether it wouldn't be possible to have an agreement which would allow or which would prohibit people from fishing, which is what we sometimes seem to be moving towards. My conclusion is this is a bad agreement. It's costing an absurd amount of money for the European Union. The thing is, if we're going to give development aid, I'm the first to support that idea. But otherwise, let's not kid ourselves. We're not giving aid here. What we want is a proper fishing agreement at the right price.
That's the end of this debate so far. The deadline for amendments is 29th of January at noon. Vote in committee on 18th or 19th February, and vote in plenary, we think, in March. So this is the end of this point, and I leave it again to...
Muchas gracias, vicepresidente.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. So we now move on to the next agenda item. As I said at the beginning, item 7 on the agenda, the Niculescu report. We're not going to look at that today. We'll be taking that one tomorrow after item 12. So that will be the last item on the agenda tomorrow morning. Okay? So we now have 2 more reports. Let's try and deal with them as quickly as possible. Can we have a bit of hush, please? Item 5, Amendment of Regulation 812, Council, concerning incidental capture of cetaceans. We heard about this from the Commission in October. In November, we had an initial debate on this report, and today we're going to look at the draft report as prepared by the rapporteur, Mr. Romeva. You have the floor, Mr. Romeva. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, can we have some quiet, please, so that everybody can follow the debate? Those who want to chat, please leave the room. Thanks for coming anyway, but if you want to carry on talking, off you go.
Yo creo que esto, en fin, la verdad podría ser...
Well, thank you, Chairman. I think we can be very quick here. We've had a debate already. We've had discussions as well with Commission representatives. We've also consulted the legal service of the Parliament. So we have this proposal from the Commission, and my proposal here is very simple. I would say, in general terms, the Commission's proposal is very reasonable. It talks in terms of changing the provisions as regards these catches or accidental catches within the framework of the Lisbon Treaty. I would say it's right to use delegated acts to outline these technical specifications for the use of acoustic dissuasion technologies, and also it's right to have administrative acts as well when it comes to disseminating information on these measures to the Member States. Implementing acts, I should have said. We would suggest two minor amendments, which I could enlarge upon if you wish. The first one is a very technical one, in fact, and the second might need some discussion, which concerns eliminating the delegation of powers to a period of 3 years. Basically, I have nothing much to add to that. As I said, we've had in-depth discussions on these proposals with the Commission representatives. A lot of work has been done in the Secretariat as well, but I think we covered the ground. But if any comments, if the colleagues have comments, I'm listening. Mr. Arsenis.
I would like to welcome and congratulate Mr. Romeva for his work. I have nevertheless a reservation about the limiting of period of the delegate acts to 3 years, given that these delegate acts that we discuss about refer to adapting conditions and technical specifications for the use of acoustic deterrent devices. So I understand that the committee's position is that delegate acts should be generally limited to 3 years, but I believe that this might be a special case, and I would like to examine this issue further. Nevertheless, we have 10,000 of cetaceans dying in the European seas every year, and the Council Regulation 812 of 2004 that we are discussing in this report, it fails to respond to this big threat. As the ICES report of 2010 concluded, it does not integrate provisions from the Habitats Directive. It applies only to certain EU areas, very limited scope for the Mediterranean, establishes a very limited monitoring, which later surveys assessed being done wrongly, wrong fisheries, wrong areas, and therefore misleading results. And it relies too much on pingers. For bycatch minimization, several studies have proven that this is not efficient and effective. There is a positive note. It phases out driftness in the Baltic, and this has been very productive. I believe that we need the EU something similar to the EU's Marine Mammal Protection Act, so we need a coherent overarching legislative framework, and I believe we should make use of this opportunity, of this revision, the Lisbonization of this agreement, to set the direction and ask from the Commission to take such an initiative, and I will be presenting similar amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fraga. Well, let's have a look at this, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Romeva. I think the report is fine, no particular problems. But we do have to be careful about the delegated powers, and that's why I think we should have this 3-year limit. We've had this in other cases. So these powers, delegated powers, should not be indefinite. But this is our general approach. This is our general approach in the wake of comitology. So I think that 3-year period is important. And as Mr. Arsenis says, this change, the very delegated powers are awarded to the Commission, unlimited in time, it flows from the Lisbon Treaty. It's all part of our adaptation of the system following the period of comitology.
No? Sí, señora Ria.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report presented by Mr. Romeva. We understand the concerns, and we also understand the push to have rather determined period than indeterminate for the duration of the delegation. We'll consider it, of course, carefully, also the duration. As for the comments made by Mr. Arsenis, I think my colleague last time mentioned that perhaps this kind of issues could be discussed when the regulation will be repealed after the reform. For the moment, we would like to stress that this is purely technical exercise of alignment with the Lisbon Treaty, so we are not willing to open the regulation to broader discussion going beyond the issue of delegated and implementing acts. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Señor Romeva.
Thank you, Mr. Romeva. Yeah, 2 points very quickly. I fully agree with the proposals made by Mr. Arsenis. I would agree that we should make progress in the direction he suggested. So I think it's better to do this in this context as in other contexts, now that we're in this post-comitology period. So I think basically we should apply this new comitology approach. As regards the 3-year period, all we're trying to do there is align ourselves with other decisions, other arrangements in other areas, seeking to be consistent there. That's all. No other reason. Now, if anyone has any specific amendments for us to debate, we'd be very pleased to look at them. But otherwise, I see no major difficulties with this particular issue now. Thank you, says the Chairman. 29th of January is the deadline for amendments, midday, 29th of January, midday. So we can now go on to the next item on the agenda, item 6. Amendments of Regulation 2187 concerning technical conservation measures for fishing resources in the Baltic, the Belts and the Sond. Now, we're going to have an introduction to this point by the Commission representative. This is Absenia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We would like to introduce distinguished MEPs with the Commission proposal on amending the Council regulation for the conservation of fishery through technical measures in the Baltic Sea, the Belts and the Sound, in line with the rules of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. This is one of the several proposals that DG Mare has recently prepared with the general exercise of within the general exercise of aligning the legislation in force with the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. The powers currently conferred on the Commission and to the Council by the regulation have been assessed and reclassified into measures of a delegated nature and measures of an implementing nature. The Commission proposal is limited solely to alignment of the regulation. And we see that any amendments outside the scope of the alignment should be left for the more substantial revision of technical measures after the CFP reform enters into force. So main changes in the proposal are that the Commission would decide by an implementing act on conformity of national measures with the conditions set out in the regulation. The provisions that provide general delegation to the Commission to adapt the detailed rules for the entire regulation without specifying its scopes is deleted. The delegation to amend Annex 1, which is the definition of the geographical areas, are taken out as unnecessary because these geographic areas do not change and there is no need for amending the Annex 1. And the delegation to amend Appendices 1 and 2. These are technical specifications for different gear. Of the Annex 2 are reclassified into delegated powers. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward for fruitful cooperation. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. ¿Alguien va a intervenir?
Thank you. Anybody want to say anything on this? Mr. Grobarczyk.
Dziękuję, Pani Przewodnicząca.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is my report, so I would like to take the floor. Dear Chair, the approach presented by the Commission is the right one. It is the right approach when it comes to the alignment of the regulation on technical measures in the Baltic Sea, the Belts and the Sound to the Lisbon Treaty. It would seem that the main idea, namely the alignment with the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, is the right one. However, in the regulation itself, 2187, we find some archaic, obsolete provisions. I don't think they should remain unchanged. We need to tackle this issue somehow, and we need to take this opportunity to amend this regulation. It's mainly about Article 14, about the measuring of fish size. This is about discards. This is about the previous policy. If we read this Article 14, we can interpret it as follows. It's not possible, it's not allowed to leave any fish which doesn't have the right size on the deck. It should be discarded as soon as possible. This is the policy under this article, but it has transpired many times that such policy is disastrous in the Baltic Sea. And in the main regulation, we have stipulated that we want to deal with the discard by 2014. There is yet another provision which is bizarre. It says that fish which which didn't attain sufficient size can be used to produce fish meal, but cannot be sold on the fish market. This is also bizarre and not consistent, and it should be changed. We cannot postpone it. We cannot procrastinate. Yet another idea is about uncontrolled industrial fishing, which is only subjected to random control exercised by the member states. This is not sufficient when it comes to the control measures. And one more, Article 27 stipulates that by the 1st of January 2008, the European Commission will conduct some research on the nets and on the gear and the impact on the population of cetaceans. As far as I know, there has been no such research presented by the Commission, and the Commission has not commissioned this research either. As far as I know, you would like to expand this report to include those issues.
La palabra porque...
Dziękuję panu Grobarczykowi.
Mr. Kuhn.
Dziękuję bardzo, pan Kuhn.
Thank you, Chairman.
Bardzo dziękuję,
Very
panie
briefly, I'd like
przewodniczący. Bardzo krótko,
pick up some of the
nawiązując do wypowiedzi pana Grabarczyka. Musimy pamiętać o tym, że patrzymy.
Und müssen natürlich jetzt auch.
We have to look at the difference between implementing acts and delegated acts. Sorry, there wasn't. I couldn't get the English channel. It's working now. It's working now.
Está corregido, está okay.
It's okay now. We got the channel back. We needed the channel. Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Kuhn, carry on. And next step will be that once the basic regulation has been voted on in the Parliament, and once we've got a clear situation, understanding how we're going to proceed with discards and what the obligations are as regards landing, and what the TFC is and what the MSY is, well, after that, when it comes to all the technical measures, they'll have to be adjusted for all the different catch areas, and I think that's going to be a big task for us. So it's difficult to say now which areas we can delete and how we're going to proceed in future. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Well, then, thank you very much. So we can consider that matter to be concluded. And that means that today's meeting is concluded because, as we said before, 7 will be left until tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you to the interpreters, too, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Mandando esto al servicio interno de nuestra Dirección General, el servicio de
Perfecto. Eso lo ha mandado a Recursos Humanos. Yo hablaré con
entonces,
Raquel.
Raquel y quizás Ricardo.
Y Ricardo.
Sí.
En Recursos Humanos, ¿quién manda? Raquel. Y